Everything in my house smells like disinfectant.
I know the feeling.
Hey, Jane.
Hey,
How are you?
I'm good.
I'm just sitting here going, what is that smell? Oh, yeah, that's the new smell.
All right, well, it looks like it's noon, so we can go ahead and get started. First, I'll just run through kind of this Zoom etiquette, because I'm sure it's new to so many of us and we're learning, and just know that I am learning alongside everyone as well as our speakers, so bear with us if there is any technical difficulties. I have everyone on mute besides our speakers, but you all have the chat box in which you can send in questions along the way, as well as if you go to reactions, there should be a spot, see now I'm even forgetting, where you can raise your hand as well if you do have a question. I do ask just to, since we're gonna have so many people joining and we already have 43 right now, if you could stop your video, I can kind of manually mute everyone, but if you can stop your video just to make it easier on all of us, if you're not speaking, of course, that would be fabulous. But I hope everyone's doing okay. So I'm Haley Zapolsky, better known as Zap. I'm coming to you right now. I'm at the Entrepreneur Center. We are actually open through all of this, but obviously very few people here, and mostly everyone is at home. And this event was thrown together in just a matter of a few days. So thanks to our speakers, David, Mark, Sherry, and Linda, all for signing on very rapidly. I know that so many entrepreneurs are just really, it's a scary time right now. It's uncertain. We don't know what's happening. So we've brought some people together who have lived through other scary times with their businesses to talk about their experiences, where none of us, unfortunately, are experts on coronavirus, but hopefully we can all talk about and share learned lessons from times that are similar to this to help entrepreneurs figure out what they're going through. So I'm joined today by David Klements, CEO of Qualifax, Mark Deutschmann with Village Real Estate, Sherry Deutschmann with Letter Logic, and Linda Rebrovick was CEO of Consensus Point during 2008. But I'll have you all give your own introductions if you want. David, would you mind starting for me by unmuting yourself?
Yes, got it. Yes, thank you for putting this together, and thanks for inviting me. Yep, David Klements, I'm the CEO of Qualifax. We are a healthcare software company based in Nashville. We've got about 275 employees. We serve mental health, addiction treatment, and intellectual and developmental disability providers, and we essentially make their core enterprise software. So we make the software that runs their businesses, everything from all their clinical workflows to all their billing and payment posting and compliance. And we figured out during the last major economic crisis, which was around 2008, we were operating then, and we're an early stage business, probably just a little bit bigger than some of the companies that are operating out of the EC, but we were an early stage business. We weren't yet profitable at that point in time. And it was a challenging situation, and look forward to sharing some of what we learned from that and how EC companies may apply some of those lessons to this current situation.
Thank you. Mark, could you give an introduction?
Yes, my name is Mark Deutschmann, and I am the president of Core Development Company. And we are a development company that creates walkable projects in neighborhoods like Hillsborough Village, 12th Avenue South, Wedgwood, Houston, East Nashville, Germantown, downtown, etc. And I am the chair emeritus of Village Real Estate. We grew to about 350 agents and staff, but I sold that to a group of 6 former agents and partners in 2019. I still license with Village Real Estate as the City Living Group, my sales team that is helping developers and others buy and sell projects and homes.
And Sherry?
Hi, I'm Sherry Deutschmann. I'm married to that guy that just spoke. I'm a serial entrepreneur and author of a book about empathy and leadership. And the relevant experience that I'll be sharing today is from my company, Letter Logic, that I started in my basement, grew and sold to private equity in 2016.
And Sherry, congratulations on your new book. I see it sitting behind you on your shelf. I've got a copy in my kitchen, as a matter of fact.
Great, read it.
Perfect time to start, order it on Amazon and start reading, honestly. And finally, Linda, could you give an introduction?
Yes, happy to. Thanks for including me with such a distinguished group of leaders on this panel, Zap. And as Zap said, I'm going to be covering my time as the CEO of Consensus Point, which was from 2009 to 2015. Consensus Point is a high growth software as a service company. We do market intelligence, business intelligence, and forecasting, and I'm still on that board. Prior to that time, I spent probably from 1990 to 2008 leading consulting and sales businesses with several Fortune 500 companies, IBM, KPMG Consulting, and Dell. And right now I am on boards for, in addition to Consensus Point, as a private company. I'm on the board of Guidehouse, which is a private equity-backed company. I'm on the board of HealthStream, as you know, locally, and then Guidehouse, which is a large consulting firm. And I'm excited to be here to share some of my stories during all of those times.
Fabulous. Well, we're so glad to have you all here. If we were all together, I would have the audience give you a big round of applause so we can try and imagine that in our heads, in our own homes. But thanks for everyone coming out. And we all have 66 people here already, which is great. But I guess to kind of start off, if you could each take a couple of minutes to perhaps dive into kind of when you had an experience in business that was most similar to this, and kind of give the overview of, you know, what happened. Was that the 2008 market crash? Was that maybe 2001? And just help us all understand like what that time looked like for you, and then we'll kind of dig deeper with more questions after. You want to go in that same order and start with David again, though, if you don't mind?
Happy to. Yep. So I'll focus on 2008 as the most recent, you know, significant downturn that we had to endure at Qualifax. And I guess the one thing I would say as a positive is, you know, if you look up until a couple weeks ago, you know, the economy was really strong, and you know, despite the fact that there were some real challenges to businesses in 2008. Many companies were started since then. Many companies have thrived and grown. And so I think there's, you know, despite the current challenges, I think there are reasons to be optimistic. And for all of the entrepreneurs on the call, you're risk takers by nature, and you'll survive this. So I would just start by saying, regardless of what happens, you know, we'll survive and get through this. And it may be with this business, it may be with another business, but you know, I would just be optimistic about what the future holds despite the current challenges. You know, when we went through the economic downturn in 2008, as I mentioned, you know, Qualifax at that time was about 30 employees. We had maybe $1 million or $2 million in revenue. We weren't profitable yet, and it was challenging. It was challenging for sure. I would say one of the things that we focused on then was communication. Yeah, I think it's you know, I think as the EC is doing today by virtue of this webinar, you know, in difficult times, people tend not to assume the best. Whether those are customers or investors or team members, you know, folks are nervous, and I think human tendency is to make assumptions about how bad things are, and not necessarily always look for facts or data to help guide the conversation. And so one of the things that, you know, I think that we focused on was just making sure that we communicated often and calmly and clearly with customers what we were doing to continue operations, making sure that they heard from us on a regular basis. We communicated clearly and often with our investors. We wanted them to make sure that they knew that we were making prudent decisions with the money that we did have, that we had a path forward, and that we were being responsible financially. And then we also communicated with our team members. You know, we wanted to make sure that our team members felt reassured that we were operating responsibly and doing everything that we could control because I think you have to focus on what you can control. And so, I think this theme of communication is really is one. Even today now, in this downturn, one of the committees that we formed at Qualifax is a communication committee, and we're meeting on a daily basis, trying to make sure that we are thoughtful about the messages that we need to get out to staff, customers, and investors alike. Let me pause there.
Thanks, Mark.
So I'll also focus on 2007, 2008, 2009. And coming into 2008, Village Real Estate was in an expansion mode. We were adding what we called city centers. So we were increasing our presence in the city, downtown, midtown. We had added mortgage company and title companies to our firm, and we were marketing 30 plus projects. So we were marketing condos and cottages. As we came into 2008, I could see that the market was going to deteriorate. You started hearing about overbuilt condos in different markets and financial crises with mortgages and derivatives, and condo sales had started slowing. I personally had over 1,600 pending contracts coming into the year, and I was thinking it was going to be a fantastic year, but it was slowing down, and by September, the market, when it crashed, it just turned into crickets. Nothing was selling anymore. And there was a building right up the hill from the EC called Rolling Mill Hill. We had sold 95 out of 100 units, and it went bankrupt. The developers themselves were over budget and out of time, and the banks just started swooping in and taking these projects. Another project we were selling, the Icon down in the Gulch, we had sold over 400 units. And by the time they started closing in October of 2008, nobody really wanted to buy, and only 150 closed. So we had to circle the wagons, and I personally was planning for budgeting pretty robustly in 2009, but I had to cut the budget by about 1.7 million, and anything that wasn't profitable, I just cut. I had to cut and pull everybody into our Hillsborough Village office and circle the wagons. So on the other hand, core development, we had 3 projects at the time, including 120 units, a 4th phase in Worthen mill lofts, but we had 181 condos and cottages, over 50 million in projects. And as my wife knows, or she didn't really know, I had a lot of debt. And so that was sort of the scenario that I came into the year with and that I was dealing with. And I'll talk more about that later.
Sherry?
My story's very different. It happened in 2005 when I learned that one of my employees had embezzled, and to hide the fact that he was embezzling from us, he started embezzling from one of our clients for whom he also worked. We were in very fast growth mode, so cash strapped, and here we found out that we owed one of our clients $200,000 when our revenue at the time was right at $3 million. So it was a major crisis, and because it was, one of their former coworkers, I couldn't really divulge everything that was going on to the company. You know that one of my mantras is transparency, and this is one of the times when I couldn't be transparent about what exactly was going on. But in crisis mode, I had a board member that joined me once a week, and we went through accounts payable and determined then exactly what had to be paid and what didn't have to be paid, and really managed cash in, cash out. We stopped all non-essential payments, and we also stopped all automated payments. So some of the things that were, on automatic payments were like the power bill and our rent and things like that. And we stopped that, had to call every vendor to say, this is where we are and we need your help in working through this crisis.
Linda?
So again, I think there's a lot of similarities and a lot of differences in all of our situations. It's 2008, and a good friend of mine who's a serial investor in entrepreneurial companies called me and said, I've got a company I'd like you to come look at and run. There's 2 founders there. They got this great idea of a prediction market to help companies forecast what's going to happen in the future. That sounded strange to me, but I was all in to take a look at it. It's a B2B product, and they had some big customers like Best Buy, Motorola, and GE. So it sounded really exciting. The founders had been working on this company at night and obviously, making money during the day in other jobs. And they were trying to raise money. And the investors said, we're not going to give you money unless you bring in someone who's got experience and, has been a leader in big companies and sold to big companies. And so, long story short, I ended up going in. I did a little consulting first to get a good feeling for it, but you don't really know a company until you're in it. And so, for many of you, I know you could be struggling with some of the same things they were struggling with, working really hard to get these big companies, but they weren't asking them to pay them a lot of money, obviously, because they were trying to get, successful references and successful customers. They had their accounts receivable was larger than their revenue, obviously. The product had a lot of issues. It was very, very hard to use. The pricing process was not as streamlined and didn't bring in a recurring revenue like they needed to do. So, a lot of things that happen when you're first starting a business. So I came in and we didn't have enough cash, and then there goes the market. And there was nothing we could do. It was, my message is what I had to do was focus on cash. And like Sherry was talking about, we went through that accounts payable every day. We managed daily cash burn, daily cash reports. You will learn some wonderful skills during this time of how to manage cash, because it's always king, but it's especially king in these difficult times. I had to work with our investors, much like David was talking about, in terms of communicating with them. It is more important than ever at this time that they know exactly where you stand from a cash burn standpoint, exactly where you stand on every single customer. And so we had, monthly communications. Obviously, I'd send them my daily reports. But it's real important to make sure that your relationship with those investors during this time, I found, was critical to our ability to pull through this. We had told the team straight out, communicated very clearly, very transparently, and no raises, no bonuses right now. This is a time when we're all going to hunker down and get through this. But it also caused me to realize that it was more important that I get to spend time with them on everything that they were dealing with around the business while we were going through this. So that's the situation I came into. And, important for me was stabilize the business, manage the cash, and then reduce the burn.
Hey, Haley, before we go further, could we ask Linda to provide like a definition of burn rate for some of our fledgling entrepreneurs who might not be familiar with that term? And
It's a great call out. Yeah.
I'm happy to, and Sherry, you all can join in with me. Basically what you can create is a daily perspective of what your inflows are going to be, your outflows are going to be, and every day be looking at the estimates at the point at which you can no longer, you make a lot of assumptions about your revenue, but you want to look at your worst case and your best case of at what point in time you literally don't have enough cash to keep the doors open. And so managing that cash burn is having a very, very tight rein on exactly what, your revenues and your expenses are, and then, what you're going to have to pay out into the future. Sherry, anything you want to add to that?
no, that was good.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. I think, all of you mentioned communications and communicating what's going on to whether that be investors, customers, and your team. Perhaps we could all just dig a little bit deeper. And, Linda, you talked about you were sending daily updates, kind of going through what was in those daily updates, like what was your cadence of updating these different stakeholders? What information were you sharing with them? And perhaps maybe how much were you sounding the alarm versus, trying to maintain a sense of calmness, but just literally maybe break it down, like what was the cadence and what was the information that you were trying to relay and what might have been some of those numbers?
Yeah, no, great question, Zap. And, what you're hearing is, this is a time of over communications. What would go to my investors on a daily basis was, and not all of them, obviously we had a core group, But, every month I would communicate with all of them, but daily I was communicating with the core group, and I was going through every customer situation. Where are we today? Anyone that were vulnerable, we might lose, what I needed their help with, because they want to jump in and help you. What customer situations we thought we could renew. So every customer situation, number one. And then secondly, how we were doing on cash, how we were doing on the business. And then three, obviously, how things were going with the team. In terms of the team, it was huddling every day to try to find out, what are your ideas? What are you seeing? What can we do? How can we sell more? As I started to say, I really spent a lot more time with the team individually to understand their needs, their healthcare needs, their spouses. I helped employees' spouses, connect on getting opportunities. I helped them, make sure that, children had places to go for childcare. You really in these times get a lot more valuable to your teams in terms of being able to help them on a daily basis so that they can focus on not worrying about their family. So I think the cadence was communicating with the employees that way more, obviously running the business as you normally do, but making sure the investors don't have any surprises. Because what eventually has to happen is I've got to go back to them to help me raise money, and in order to build the business back up at the right time.
Anyone else want to chime in?
Sure. For me, my customers in 2008 were our agents. So the agents are independent contractors and essentially entrepreneurs on their own, but they affiliate with Village Real Estate. And what was happening for the company was also happening for them. And we had to really pull together to help them find best practices, ways to keep afloat in a market that's deteriorating. We had trained so many of them to sell condos because we were the urban real estate company, and we were really working to sell developments for developers. And I had so many agents who were on teams that had put sometimes years into selling a project like the Rolling Mill Hill project or the Icon project, with the possibility of getting paid when these sales started happening. And as the sales started deteriorating, their future income flow deteriorated as well. And so how to help a lot of people who are starting to experience sort of extreme difficulty and loss of their expectations was hugely important for me at Village.
And Zab, this is Jane Allen. And, when I was probably in a different position because I started the company in 2000. And so 2001 hit and I had a small team. So it was very different than when we were in 2008 because we survived both of them. But in 2001, it really, as the leader of the organization, it's a calm and a confidence, but also a reality. If in fact, in talking to my clients, I wasn't trying to sell my clients. I was just trying to go out and talk with them and listen to what they were going through. And then with regard to my employees, it was, here's the reality. So, I did have people willing to take pay cuts. And granted, wow, they weren't getting paid much to begin with because I was a startup for the most part. But it was, I took to where I was taking no money. And then, the few employees I had actually took less so that we could band together and get through it. Because after September 11th, everybody was numb. And so nobody was doing anything for a few months, it seemed. And so it was just being honest. And as others have said, the communication and transparency. And I remember one time someone gave me the advice, the only thing you truly have control over is your attitude and your effort. And so that's what I owned during that time because I couldn't control whether clients were going to start buying or whether people were going to want to meet with me, but I could control my effort and I could also control my attitude with others. And I do think that ends up, we all got through it and it made us stronger. And a little bit to what I think David said earlier, it made us a better organization from which to build from. And so I think that that's, like I said, I was in a different place than the others that are speaking. So I just wanted to add a little bit about, a very small, in the initial year to 2 years of being in business when it hit.
I think that's great. I think a great perspective, and just, you know, one of the common themes, like across what we're discussing, is that, yeah, these crises do tend to bring teams together if the leaders are thinking about things the right way and communicating clearly and demonstrating leadership. And we know that if you're at the Entrepreneur Center building a company, that you already have leadership skills. You know, one of the, it just occurred to me that there was, we were pretty badly impacted by the flood. For those of you that were in Nashville in 2010, we had this terrible rainstorm. We got like 20 inches of rain over the course of a couple of hours. And our building at that point was downtown on 2nd Avenue, right at sort of 2nd Avenue and Demonbreum. And it rained so badly that we had this massive flood. And I remember getting up on whatever the next day was and driving downtown. And at that point, downtown Nashville wasn't nearly quite as developed as it is today. And there was a parking lot that overlooked our building. And I stopped there and I looked down and I said, oh, the building looks okay. And then I realized that it was standing in 10 feet of water. And that I was looking at the building reflecting upon itself. And that water was halfway up to our front door. And so we were forced out. Obviously, we were forced out of the building. We had to emergency scramble as a startup, and we ended up working remotely. Folks working from their home. We set up a temporary office in our attorney's office, and but we had to work remotely for a couple months. And what I remember from that was how much it brought the team together. You know, this sort of crisis can bring out the best in people. Sometimes it brings out the worst, but stress plays on everybody differently. But I do think that this is an opportunity, as everybody's saying, to create teamwork and to come together in a way that just the normal course of business may not create.
Jane, do you want to, there's a question in the chat, maybe it would be interesting to dig deeper about how you communicated the pay cuts to coworkers, and then maybe we can lead into a larger conversation with everyone of maybe the tough financial decisions and what were those first ones that you had to make and how did you make those. But we want to start with Jane talking about the pay cuts. That'd be great.
Sure. No, I mean, and again, I didn't necessarily do a pay cut. What I did was brought the team together. And a little bit to what Linda said, even though she was on a macro level compared to where we were, it's here's the revenues coming in and which are very small. And yet I do believe we're hearing enough from our clients. Once we get through this, there is a need for the product we're offering that they value enough. So I believe there is a reason for us to stay in business, but I didn't have outside investors. I bootstrapped we bootstrapped every bit of it. And so we just sat people down and said, here's where we are. Here's what we have. I'm now not going to take home any money, and I'm not going to ask anybody else to do that, but we're trying to figure out how to manage through this time. And so the response received was, well, then I'll take home less. And then another one said, well, then I'll take home less. And I mean, again, we were at the stage, we didn't even have benefits for people. I mean, we were early, but that meant the world. And it also meant we were all in there together. And during that one, I didn't have to make a pay cut or lay people off. After September 8th, we were a bigger organization, and that we really did have to look at our overhead and start refining about what resources were vital to get us through. But after September 11th, it really was just bringing people together and talking openly and not hiding anything. I mean, we're either going to survive or we're not, and we survived.
Does anyone else want to chime in of just kind of the first few difficult decisions that they had to make and what that looked like?
I can share with you some difficult conversations I had to have.
Mm.
Had to start with me with my client that we owed $200,000 to. and to go right to the top of that organization, to the CFO, to tell him exactly what had happened and how it had happened. And they were a large healthcare system, and they were our biggest client. And I just had to throw myself at their mercy to say, this has happened and I can't pay it back right now. And I worked out a payment plan with them to keep them as clients, and then just to give them a credit and to spread it out over a year, which was still really difficult for us to do. But they agreed to that. And up until the time when I sold the company in 2016, they were still clients, 10 years later. So and the next thing was really to meet with each vendor to say, yes, we've been paying on 30-day terms, but I've got to change this. Will you extend us 90 days? And I was amazed at how gracious and accommodating all of our vendors were. And this was interesting. The smaller the vendor, the more likely they were to agree to a change in terms, because they felt our pain more acutely than some of the larger companies who were a lot less accommodating. And I took a 50% cut in pay myself, which was transparent just to the senior leadership and I told the client that I was doing that. And then the hardest decision was to halt the growth for a short period of time, to tell the salespeople, you need to work on account maintenance and not adding accounts, because it was pretty cash intensive for us to add a new account. And so for a short period of time, like 3 to 6 months, I think we had a sales moratorium. That's hard when you're in a fast growth mode as a company.
I'll chime in on the communication. So in 2008, we had built the company as a community-facing real estate company. We had given 5% of the company at the start to the Village Fund, and we had been sort of partnering with our community by gifting 5% of everything that was distributed throughout our history. What I encourage my agents to do is to, rather than retreat in a recession, was to get out there and be out there with their customers more. And one way to do that was to be there in places where they were giving. So we called them change agents, and we said, you guys go out and be the face of the Village Fund, get out there in the community, do something that you really are passionate about and care about, and you'll find that it's a virtuous circle. You'll find that people want to care for you and refer to you, and if they are going to buy and sell, then you get a chance to share by being a giver. And it did help, because you can get fearful and start thinking of yourself, but you have to look outwards and look at the entire community and everybody around us and say, listen, we're in this together. And in a time of recession or difficulty, some of the social profits get hurt the most because people maybe hold on to their resources. So figuring out ways to give if you can, and find out who's needy around you, and then use it as a tool for, in my case, my salespeople or agents, was very helpful in 2008, 2009.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna add, even now with this crisis, I mean, I think, things that we're doing, first of all, I think you have to have reality-based conversations. I think everybody's saying that, this is not business as usual, and you can't delude yourself to thinking that, all the things that you were doing yesterday are going to make sense today. They're just not. Customers may or may not want to hear from you. Prospects may or may not want to hear from you. So we just start with reality-based conversations, like, what is this actually going to do to our business? And we do some sensitivity modeling, right? So we look at some different scenarios, and we have scenario-based conversations. If nobody buys from us for the next 6 months, what is that going to do? If sales are decreased by 50%, what is that going to do? If 10% of our customers can't pay their bills for the next 3 months, what is that going to do? So we have reality-based conversations. We do some scenario planning. All of that ties back into this cash modeling, right? So that you're anticipating some of the maybe worst case scenarios and trying to understand what would that look like for the business. How long could we survive? How much cash do we have on hand? And then, the next thing we do is we're trying to focus on critical path operations. So what are the things that we have to do in order to keep our operations running? And again, even through these last couple of weeks, we anticipated that we were going to have to work from home. We were going to have to go from 275 employees showing up at the office every day to everybody working from home. And so while there are a lot of things that we could do and would make sense to do, we really got very focused on, what is the critical path to enabling that to happen? And we identified really three things when it came down to it. A very short and manageable list that we needed to do to operationalize this. And so, I think, and then from there, we had to execute. And we wanted to make sure that we were focused on what we had to get done. We cleared people's schedules so that they didn't have distractions or competing priorities. And then we checked in regularly, morning and afternoon, on progress. And I think what we're doing today is as relevant as what we had to do in 2010 during the flood, is as relevant as what we had to do in 2008, 09 during the economic crisis.
No, that's great. And I think what I was going to add is very similar to what David's saying. A lot of times this is not only a great way for you to improve your skills in cash management and your team leadership that we've been talking about, but it's also a good time to look inward and look at R&D. I mean, I've read stories about how Apple, obviously a great big company, but during 2001, I believe they had a 33% reduction in sales. It's what we're going through right now. Customers don't have time to work with you. They're so busy. And so you're not going to get a lot of their time. But that was when they invented the iPod mini. That's when they invented iTunes, because they turned inward and said, what can we do? Let's spend of our money we have 8% of sales on some R&D. Again, I'm giving you a very large example, but trying to get a point across that, this may be a great time for innovation. It may be a great time for you to be thinking about, once things turn around, things you can do differently. For us, we had to build a brand new product. I didn't want to start over, believe me. I just wanted to add features, but I knew that, the product, just as I said earlier, wasn't easy to use, and we needed to make it something that would scale. So, over time we did invest and came out the other end, which was a very difficult decision to make. But what I'm encouraging you to do in this difficult time is think of ways that you can take the opportunity to find things you could do that you weren't able to do before because of, the lack of ability to be in front of your customers all the time. On the other hand, if you can be in front of your customers, I've never found anything that will motivate a team, that will get everybody, energized, then how do we solve this problem for our customer? How do we come help their business be better and as a team? And so that's also something that we tried to do more of and bring more expertise to help them be successful. And it sure paid off after that was over, because they knew we were there for them always.
Linda, you read my mind. I want to do something a little more positive and talk about how you got creative during those times. And you're all still working now, perhaps even these past 2 weeks, how you've gotten a little bit creative with what you're doing, or your employees have gotten creative, and share kind of learning moments from that. Anyone have anything creative? I don't want to force call on anyone.
This is Jane. I'm happy to jump in a little bit in that, as I alluded to earlier, if in fact you can it's what Linda said, everybody is nervous or everybody is going through uncertainty. And the reality is there's never a playbook. And so, for someone like myself, who was the teacher and the lawyer, I always like to read and do research. And there are no playbooks for times like this. But what there is people want community and people want relationship. And so, for me, again, I took off my sales hat and just put on my relationship and just going out and talking to people. Some were customers and some were not customers. And whether that means you go meet for a cup of coffee or whatever, and you talk about family and other things, but you also listen. And it really is listening to what's being said, which allows you then to come up with creative solutions, as Linda said. And after 2008, we definitely pivoted. And it truly was just in listening to what people were saying. And, and even now, Zap, you came up with this brilliant idea. And And that's what I love about the people that I have the opportunity and I'm blessed to work with every day, is trying to make sure we're continuing with community and relationships and being a resource. So I think that is across any industry and across any business, but others feel free to chime in.
Well, this is a crisis right now for I'm chair emeritus at Village, but we have to communicate with our agents, and they're also now home-based. You know, the office is cleared out and people are working at home, and we're having to think about different kind of showing protocol, how, you know, how maybe not to drive your customers around so you sort of resist the social contact, how to have an open house, maybe virtually, more video communication, and also, you know, again, encouraging the agents to not just spread gloom and doom. You know, you need to come out and find positive ways to help your customers weather the storm. So, for instance, putting out notes on, you know, honeydews or things they might do at home right now, or great projects, or better ways for them to take care of themselves, or, you know, just making recommendations that connect so that when people are out and about and getting and buying homes, then they as agents will be able to be there again.
Yeah, we're doing just on the innovation side, you know, I think about it two ways. The first is, you know, there's so many online collaboration tools now. And so, you know, while I think that I feel strongly that face-to-face business is really important, whether it's customer training, sales calls, implementations, whatever that may be, you know, I think that personal touch is what has distinguished, I think, our business. But nonetheless, a lot of that can be done virtually. As an example today with using the Zoom session. And so, you know, one of the things that we're doing is we're approaching customers and just saying, look, we'd love to carry this on virtually. So we had, as an example, we had a customer training that was scheduled in Michigan, one in Colorado, one in New Jersey. Normally we would have flown a customer success manager out there. We would have done all that in person. And we went to virtual classrooms and all customers showed up, attended. We made it a little bit shorter, the duration, so that they weren't pulled away from, you know, sort of their day-to-day for as long. But, you know, I would say that's one example of, I think, something that all the businesses at the EC could do, is just look at deploying these virtual collaboration tools. And then, you know, the other thing that we're doing is, you know, when we reach out to customers, obviously you have to be sensitive because they're dealing with their own crises. But to the extent that you can catch somebody and have a conversation, you know, you should be asking what you could do to help. And there may be either direct solutions that you provide, or partnerships, or connections. I mean, the EC is an ecosystem of businesses, and there may be a need that one of your customers has that someone else could fulfill. But you know, we just start with, hey, what can we do to help? And so, in this case, for us, a lot of our customers were concerned about delivering healthcare services to people with mental illness because they thought that, you know, maybe their staff members would get sick, or maybe the clients, the patients that were coming in would be ill, and so they wanted to move towards telehealth. And you know, this was a catalyst for them to do that, and they were coming back to us and saying, "What can you do to help us move in the direction of telehealth?" And so, you know, when we heard that 20 times, we said, okay, this is something where we can lean in. This is something that we can do. And so we started to put together training courses. We started to put together peer learning. We're going to investigate some potential partnerships that we can integrate with. So I think if you can get your customers on the phone and just have a quick conversation on, hey, what can we do to help? We know things are difficult for you at this time. You may get some data points that will allow you to creatively think about solutions you can put forward.
Awesome. Anyone else before the next question? I feel like I see Sherry trying to talk, but you're muted.
There we go.
Perfect.
One of the most innovative things I've witnessed, I didn't do it myself, was our landscape company this week showed up with about 10 people in our lawn, which usually they'll have 2 or 3. And so we talked to him about, you know, where did all these people come from? And he has just made a concerted effort to hire all of the restaurant workers that are now out of work on a temporary basis, bringing them in to help. They're working outside. They're in the sunshine or in the rain lately, but they're in a more healthy environment, and he's providing an opportunity for them to have income during this difficult time. And so partnering with companies like his might be a great way for us to keep our employees employed and still engaged with us when the storm passes.
Yes, since he had that conversation with us, I think I've referred him 30 times. He's somebody who I want to refer because I can see that he's reaching out and helping the community.
That's awesome. We'll take a question kind of from the chat box from Claire. Perhaps maybe Linda might be best, but other folks can chime in on this, is figuring out how to handle conversations with early investors who have shown great interest but no pen to paper yet, and how Claire's not wanting to lose momentum in those conversations and not push them, but also not push them away, and kind of how to find that balance with potential investors.
Yeah, that's a great question, because they're going to be very busy trying to keep their portfolio companies that they already have getting through this crisis. And so it's hard to get their attention. This is a creative one. I think I think kind of to play on top of what David was talking about, he was doing with his customers, I tried to do with my investors. I actually knew one, was in a certain business, and he was dealing with something, let's say, like the telehealth at the time. And I figured out a way to introduce him to someone that I knew who was very knowledgeable and was an expert in that area to help one of his portfolio companies. And he was so grateful for that he kept, the discussions going open with me. So again, it's trying to figure out how can you help those investors at this time is one way to keep the door open. Obviously, second is to be sure that, they're, that you're creating a trusting relationship with them by demonstrating your ability to get through this as a leader, by being able to show them that you've got the leadership to do the right thing. Let's say your own, I thought Jane's point, I did the same thing. I'm sure we all did. Don't take money yourself if you're not able to pay others. And so investors really appreciate people that are totally committed to the business and that will do whatever it takes to step forward and not only talk about it, but do it. Those are two things that might be helpful to you. Clearly you will be respectful of their time, but I think if you can do it in a way that helps them and demonstrates what you're doing, just like we said earlier, not pushing them to sell to them, but creating a tighter bond, it'll pay off. It really will.
Thanks. Anyone else have any insight on this topic?
On investor relations, is there a specific question?
Yes, on investor relations, like during this period and how to keep them engaged. I wasn't sure who's raised money in times like these before.
Yeah, it's first of all, it's tricky, right? It depends on the sort of it depends on the state of your business. And I know, folks dialing in probably have businesses in different states of revenue, pre-revenue, profitability, pre-profit. As I mentioned in 2008, we were not profitable and needed investor capital in order to run the business. But it's, first of all, I would say if you're dealing with individuals, if you have angel investors, you just need to acknowledge that this money's coming out of people's checking accounts that are 30% smaller today than they were 2 weeks ago. The stock market's down a third from its highs, and most angel investors have money in the stock market. And so they're probably looking at their own portfolios, feeling a little more depressed, today than they were a month ago. And so I think you have to approach that with some compassion and empathy for their situation and kind of seeing what their tolerances and thresholds are to be able to continue to invest. Institutional investors are, are in a different place and investing, investing other people's money. So they're going to have a bit of a different mindset in terms of the returns that they're trying to drive. Institutions are likely to prioritize portfolio companies that they think are going to be more successful and double down on those investments. And so, making sure that you're keeping investors up to date on on customer conversations, renewals, churn risk, new sales, all those things are going to, help paint a picture for the investors about whether or not this is a viable business. I would say if you could get capital now, if someone's willing to invest, I would take as much as you can on probably more favorable terms than you're willing to take for the investor, a month ago. So I would approach this with some compassion for their situation. I would probably come with more flexibility than you may have had in the past. And, if you believe in your business and you think there are sort of good early or sort of leading indicators about why 60 days from now this is still sort of viable and valuable, then you should be in a position to continue to raise capital if you need it and you have investors lined up or already contributing.
Awesome. Definitely feels like a theme has been, everyone is going through this crisis right now. So it's just having conversations and being kind of understanding. It'd be great maybe to talk about like mental health, just as a leader, how you dealt with your own mental health and how you kind of looked at your team's mental health and perhaps dealt with some of their fears.
A lot of drinking.
I love that we're about honesty here. That's perfect, David.
I say mental health. What mental health?
Yeah, really.
I think to your word, Zap, honesty is the answer. I think you got to be yourself and tell them that this is hard on you and why and how. And then most importantly, that you're in it with them. And, they helped me get through many different, whether it was 9/11 when I was in a plane flying up to Washington at the same time that the buildings at the Pentagon were being blown up, and I landed somehow in Dulles and was so lucky. And, my team really helped me get through that. That was kind of a panic situation. And I think you become, like David said earlier, closer to your team in this situation. But, and as I also said earlier, I spent, more time trying to help them through the situations personally, like childcare, like healthcare. So, I think honesty and trust and integrity and, really caring about being sympathetic and empathetic are so important as a leader all the time. But it's a little bit more important that you put more time into them and it'll help your mental health. Or for me, it did anyway.
For me personally, I'm just taking a lot of walks, getting outside because you can. Taking a walk on a greenway is a great idea to help your own mental health and sort of get out of the fretting that comes with the crises. So you can actually watch the birds and look at the trees instead of thinking about everything you think about the rest of the time. And again, what we're encouraging some of our agent clients to do is to look at some things that they hadn't been able to do in the past and take care of it. Clean out the basement or maybe teach your kids how to paint a room or something like that. Do something that's a little out of your wheelhouse when you're working all the time, and do something that's good for your home environment. So those are a couple things. Walking with people is a good thing. You can walk 4 feet away if you need to and have a great walk and talk.
Sure. I would say, building a business is stressful on a good day, right? So, let's just acknowledge that, the work that you're doing to build your company is difficult and cut yourself some slack, I would say, first and foremost. Just this is an extraordinary situation. It's an amazingly difficult time that no one has prior training for. So just acknowledge that. Let's just start with this is a difficult time and space, and no one's expected to be superhuman or have all the answers. And I think if you approach the situation with that mindset, hopefully that helps a bit. I do agree. I think starting the day with a hike or a walk or just something to get, sort of clear your head makes a lot of sense. And I always feel better just making progress. I tend to get more anxious when things are sitting still. And so, whatever progress can look like, there's plenty of, there's plenty of things that you can do with your team around future state planning, customer calls, let's have sort of a brainstorming session on whatever that may be. So I would just think about, what are things that we can make forward progress on? Because I think people tend to feel better when they're busy and working on something.
Yeah, and Zap, I would just add to it. I mean, in one is with the team is just dealing with the elephant in the room. Fear is alive and well. And, how do you overcome fear? And, knowledge. So like for me, instead of relying on, local publications or news, I've dug into like, what is Harvard writing about this? What are others writing to actually gain information? And then like, even with our own organization, sending out the CDC and WHO guidelines so that people can look for themselves. And because I do think the unknown creates fear. And then, and then also like this morning I started with, years ago, someone gave me a book of gratitude so that I could write down things that I'm grateful for each and every day. Now, unfortunately, that lasted about 3 weeks and then I got back to my normal life. But, today I pulled it back out and just really thought about what am I grateful for as we sit here. And then also trying to embrace the moment. I mean, all of a sudden I went from almost empty nester to a full house of college kids and, playing games late at night and just, again, it's just adapting to the different circumstances and trying to make the best out of it. But as far as for my own mental health, I start a daily devotional and then I've brought in gratitude. And then for my team, it's just talking to them. I mean, we have one flying back from Australia today. And so I've got a call with her this afternoon and she is staying in quarantine. Just as Linda said, just talking and meeting people where they are, and hopefully you can be a light in their life in some way as we all get through this.
I have a question from Jacqueline that I really like. If there's any tools and principles you can apply to survive this season, and if anyone could elaborate on cash modeling and scenario planning. If anyone wants to read that in the chat, I can read it again as well.
Yeah, those are great questions. Probably hard to dive into and elaborate on cash modeling and scenario planning on our video, but we would love to help you, Jacqueline, offline go through that. That's something that we've got a lot of smart people can help you with at the EC. It's trying to remember that there are so many tools out there that can help you with that right now. And I think that's smart to think about that and figuring out which ones you can use and how to put them to use. It really is different now. That's the beautiful thing about today is the technology is so far ahead of where it was even in 2008. And as I was laughing, thinking to myself, we changed our sales model during that time and put more people on the phones, And now, what we were really doing was creating outbound sales reps from the inside. And today you've got so many tools to help you with that in terms of technology. I highly recommend you do that and use, products that help you with email, social campaigns, and other things of that nature that are tools that are out there. So, from my perspective, those are some ways to survive this season in terms of looking at your sales and marketing immediately. And then obviously someone else might have some technology they're using for cash modeling. I'll turn it over to them. Hopefully that's helpful.
This is not around technology, but more about mindset, to think about instead of filling the pipeline to work on client retention. And that doesn't mean necessarily selling them more services right now. It means doing what you can to feed their pipeline. So looking at their business and seeing how you can be invaluable to them now, so that after this storm has passed, then they will think about you and how to build your business back up, and will send you more business at that time. They need to see you as an ally.
Awesome. Well, it's 12:59. So does anyone have any like last words of advice? And then I'll have Jane kind of wrap up for us.
I would just reiterate that we're all in this together. You and your teams are all in this together. You and your clients, the EC, we're all here to help you, and hope that this discussion has been helpful. And we're proud of you all. As you go, so does everything around us. And so you as entrepreneurs are leading the way. And we're proud of you and excited for you and here for you.
And remember, this is a temporary problem. It might be 3 months, it might be 8 months, but eventually this problem is going away. So do what you can to weather the storm during this short period.
Awesome. Jane, do you want to wrap up for us?
Sure. I just want to thank everyone for participating. Thanks, Zap, for having the idea. Again, the Nashville Entrepreneur Center was started so that successful entrepreneurs could give their time and resources to help the next generation. So when Zap asked, can we get people together who have weathered prior economic storms and survived, this is a great idea. And I really appreciate the people being willing to share. And then also just know that we as the Entrepreneur Center, we really are working to provide resources to be able to help you through this time. And so I've read a few of the questions that have been presented. And, one thing we're talking about doing, we are actually a Google for Startup partner. And so there is a worldwide organization that we are participating with right now, getting best practices. And Bryn and Jeremy are compiling those, and then we're going to start sharing them. Also, we've thought about doing, a coffee break and having people just get on and have like tip of the day. And so we're looking to do other things to help create community and connections and hopefully provide resources for you. And I know Zap has some ideas as well moving forward. So again, we really appreciate you participating and really do want to continue in the dialogue. At the same time, our programs, thank you to Jeremy and John and others, the programs are continuing. We are now what's called a virtual first organization. And hopefully we won't be this way for a long time, but we will be this way as long as needed to get through this. And again, as everyone has said, communication, 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 and knowing you're going to come out better and stronger once you get through this time period. So thank you.
Awesome. And I put my email in the chat box if anyone wants to email out with any ideas of kind of what content that they would like to see, questions that they would like to have. Perhaps I can connect you with people going through the same obstacles, but feel free to reach out.
Before we go, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Before we go, can anyone that is willing to put their camera on really quick, just turn it on and get a picture of all of us waving so we can see and just kind of capture all the beautiful faces that we're seeing today. I think it's really cool and really important. So once we get everyone going, I want to do it.
Wow.
Give about 10
we're
more
all
seconds
unmuted.
for everyone. Okay, give me 1 second.
Awesome.
Give me 1 second and I will get this going. Sorry, I'm trying to make sure I get everyone. Cool. Oh, what? One more time? I'm so sorry.
Wow. Jeez.
Beautiful.
All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. Everyone wave. Yay.
Awesome.
Thank you,
Beautiful.
Jeremy.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's so cool. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, girl. Bye, Jacqueline. Hey, Rand. Bye, Brad.